When you look at your tenure as the analyst, how does this year compare to other years? Is it about the same, or is it a little bit different, or I guess maybe how's it different in some respects?
Well, it's interesting that you ask. I just ran into Governor Pete Wilson at a meeting earlier this week, and I hearkened back to his administration when the budget gap that we were facing at that time in the early 1990s was about 33% of overall general fund revenues. As bad as it is today, and it is a significant problem, we're more in the 10 to 12% range in terms of the amount compared to the overall state budget.
We last year and the year before used bond revenue to, in fact, move us along. Have we reached our bond borrowing capacity?
Well, the voters of California authorized the state to go out and sell $15 billion of bonds to really help the state work its way out of these significant budget problems from the early part of the decade. We sold about $11.2 billion of that amount, and we have a little bit more than $3 billion remaining that the state could sell in order to assist in this circumstance. But I've certainly been concerned that the state has been using a significant amount of borrowing, and actually when we look at the state's budget situation, part of our gap between revenues and expenditures is that we're paying back with principal and interest payments as we would in our own home if we took out a mortgage. And so debt isn't free, and in many ways that debt is coming due.
And the insidious thing about debt is that you ultimately have to pay it back.
Exactly.
You have to pay it back. When we take a look at your analysis, your fiscal outlook, I believe I don't remember exactly what page it is, number 5 or number 6, but it talks about a $10 billion deficit. About 40% of that is payment of principal and interest.
That's correct.
And then the following year, it's the same, about 40%. But there's still an ongoing structural deficit of anywhere from $5 to $6 billion, $6 billion.
When we look out to 2012-2013, which was the last year of our forecasts, we did see a structural budget problem basically in each year of our forecast period. And so once we pay off the Proposition 57 bonds, the state's situation will improve, but we're still not out of the woods. We'll be spending more than we're taking in under current law.
Let's talk about, before we talk about how you solve the problem, tell us how the initiative process has impacted the budget.
Well, the initiative process in California has a long history, and certainly I'd say in terms of the budgetary impact, you can start looking, say, at Proposition 13. When the voters passed Proposition 13 in 1978, it actually directed the legislature to allocate property taxes within each county in California between schools and other parts of local government. If you go forward after that, we had, for example, the state lottery. I believe it was in about 1984. In 1988, the voters decided they wanted a constitutional funding guarantee from kindergarten through the community colleges, known as Proposition 98, as it was passed at the time. More recently, the voters decided in 2002 or actually maybe it was 2004, to tax Californians that earn more than $1 million a year, an extra 1%, and use that money for mental health.
For mental health.
So we've had a variety of measures over many years in California that certainly have added additional complexity to the state budget as voters have indicated their priorities at the ballot box.
Right off the top of your head, when just from a percentage standpoint, when we talked about that $1 billion or $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood, I frequently get the question of how many dollars are you actually working with that you have some degree of flexibility. So, what's the number based upon the initiatives and legislative mandates that have been placed on that budget?
Well, in many ways, the legislature has a lot of discretion because both you can change existing law as well as go back to the voters on the Constitution. Even Proposition 98, for example, which
could be suspended or
right, and it controls over 40% of the general fund budget in round terms. But that being said, there are also federal requirements that the state has to meet. We put up matching funds that are matched by the federal government. So there are a lot of impacts by each legislative decision on the budget, And that's where we try to assist the legislature.
Is it a situation, is the flexibility somewhere, though, in the neighborhood of, there's about 75% that's in statute or there because of an initiative, and the legislature is really working with about 25% in terms of flexibility, other than changing the laws and all that sort of thing?
We haven't looked at that percentage in recent years, so I really don't know.
Okay, all right. Don't mean to put you on the spot. We now have a critical financial situation in California because of the subprime market.
Right.
What's that done to the budget, the foreclosures, the number of foreclosures that we have? How's that impacted the budget?
Well, clearly it's a major restructuring that's going on in the real estate market in California, and about 15 to 20% of California's economy is related to both construction, real estate, and the financial industries that are related to real estate. So it's a very significant effect. As people are having their mortgages trigger upwards, there's less disposable income. We're seeing that in terms of the sales tax revenues. We're also seeing it on the income tax side, for example, as real estate agents have less sales. We're also really seeing a slowdown in the construction industry. We've had boom times, but we're also seeing that prices of houses are also changing and significantly being lowered in many regions in California.
And our number one industry is construction, is it not?
Well, it's certainly a very big player in California.
Mm-hmm. We are told that the governor has directed all state departments to cut 10%. Is that enough to deal with the budget situation, or have you had an opportunity to analyze that?
We haven't had an opportunity to analyze it as yet. Clearly the specifics will matter. There may be some areas that if we cut them, say 10%, less revenue would come into the states. For example, if we cut over at the Franchise Tax Board. So the specifics of his proposal really matter, and we're still investigating.
It's still the devil in the details.
Exactly.
I understand. We talked a few minutes ago about the fact that we're looking at a $10 billion deficit, and about $4 billion of that has to do with principal and interest payback. You clearly can't borrow your way out of trouble. That's your conclusion as the legislative analyst?
Well, I think that
over the long haul.
Sure. I think that the borrowing that the state has done was to help try to get our revenue and expenditure lines into balance, but they still aren't into balance, and it really does mean the tough choices to get our revenue and spending lines into balance and to look out over the long term to ensure that they're balanced not only today, but going forward so that we can deliver the services for the people of California that they expect.